Hello, everyone. This is Barry Jones with sphistory.com. And I am stuck out in my truck again. We're having this terrific rainstorm and our internet is out. I don't know if you can hear me. Hopefully you can. It's coming down pretty hard. Um, it's a little bit lighter out, so I have a little bit better light. But anyway, I'm doing this a little later than I normally do. And we are looking at episode 97 today, which is a continuation of the Conspirator 5 series, and the topic is the Secret Service. But before I begin, I'd like to pay homage to one of the lions of the research community. Of course, he's a world famous forensic pathologist. He died yesterday. His name is Dr. Cyril Wecht, and one cannot underestimate or overestimate the contributions he made to the case, specifically with regards to physical evidence. He is the doctor that finally got access to the National Archives and discovered that the president's brain was missing along with all the tissue slides. No one except the government knew that until Dr. Cyril White made that public. And he systematically tore apart over 4, 5, 6 decades, actually, the Warren Commission, especially the part having to do with the autopsy, Humes and Boswell and Fink. And boy, I'll tell you what, if you ever heard him speak, I was just listening this morning. He was speaking 20 years ago at a JFK symposium in Pennsylvania at Duquesne College, and he was Duquesne University. And he was asking a simple question: what's the problem? Because the media had began to assault the research community with, why are you reopening this case? Why are you relitigating something that happened in the 60s? Why can't you just accept the conclusions of the government and move on? Why must you dig up the past? And this was his rebuttal to that. And he says, what's the problem? If it's so straightforward, if it's so open and shut, if it was all done, as you say, by a man who is no longer alive, Lee Harvey Oswald, what's the problem? And he asked a series of questions in his speech about who did this. And he said, for example, who ordered the removal of the president's body from Texas? Who put Humes and Boswell in charge of an autopsy when they'd never done a gunshot autopsy before? Who lost the president's brain and tissue slides? Who went after Jim Garrison when he tried to reopen the case down in New Orleans and thwarted his efforts to get to the bottom of it by refusing witnesses, killing off witnesses, denigrating his reputation? Who went after Oliver Stone in the 90s when he was producing the movie JFK? Who hid evidence from the House Select Committee? He just kept going through, and he said, I could talk for hours and hours about who or what was behind all of these shenanigans. It's always the government. And he says, if it's so straightforward, what do you have to hide? Why are you? And even after the media, he says, who has been so incurious as to open up their own investigation into this? Why do we have to do it? Why don't you do it? Well, anyway, obviously these are rhetorical questions, but it's a very powerful speech. And if you ever heard Cyril Wecht speak, there was never any doubt what perspective he was coming from, and it offended him as a forensic pathologist to see the decisions that were made in the aftermath of JFK assassination, which forever destroyed the physical evidence or contaminated or corrupted it. You know, he made a big deal about the car, and we talked about the car and how it was cleaned and washed afterwards, and no tissue, no evidence of tissue or blood samples. Nothing could be retrieved from that vehicle once the crime scene was destroyed. He said that wouldn't happen to a homeless person's murder in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, much less the president of the United States. Anyway, he makes a very strong case. And anyway, he died yesterday at age 93. And it's a seminal moment because these original folks who really dove in and uncovered a lot of evidence that we now talk about as if it's always been known. It wasn't always known that the president's brain was missing. It took, he was talking about how it took years for him to get access to the National Archives. He had to apply, and you had to be a forensic pathologist initially. That's the only people that would be allowed in, and you had to show a legitimate historical reason for why you wanted to get in and get access to that material. And of course, they allowed other people in, but they knew from what perspective he was coming. So they denied him, denied him, denied him, denied him. He wrote letters, he wrote letters, he wrote letters, he wrote letters. He had to sit for interviews. It took years for him to get access to the National Archives. And when he got in there, it didn't take him long to figure out why it took so long. The most important pieces of evidence were missing. And of course, they blamed it on Jackie. They said, well, Jackie didn't want, we were going to turn this all over to Jackie. When pressed on it, Jackie says, I never got it. I didn't want it. What did I want the president? What did I want his brain for? So just subterfuge everywhere you look, and evidence that would have been very key in determining, for example, the trajectory of the bullet, the path of the bullet, even where the wounds were. They changed the location of the wounds. The Warren Commission did. All of that would have been very helpful in determining all that kind of stuff. But it took people like Dr. Cyril Wecht years to get access to determine, to find out what was missing, so that now we know that we accept it as stated fact. But it took him years to determine that. So just wanted to pay a little honor to him and the contributions that he made. Today's question is, we're still with the Secret Service. How would a conspiracy of Secret Service agents work? I've kind of started answering this in a previous episode. I didn't get real in depth in it, but I did mention it. And I want to go back to Fletcher Prouty, former intelligence official. And, here's another one that from the inside began asking questions and incurred the wrath of a lot of people, higher ups and people in his line of work for questioning the narrative. And of course, it all started with a personal reason, and he was ordered to go on vacation by his boss, whom he identifies as Ed Lansdale. And then while he's gone, the assassination takes place. He finds out about it while he's in New Zealand. And his role in motorcades, presidential motorcades, was always to arrange additional security, which meant in Dallas would have been the 112th Military Intelligence Group. And so the assumption was on his part, because he really had no reason to suspect anything or anybody until he checked on that to make sure that that had been done in his absence. When he found out the opposite had been done, the 112th had been ordered to stand down, that was a red flag. And he begins looking into other things at that point. And, it became a lifelong obsession after that. But this is that image from the JFK movie played by Donald Sutherland, where he is reading the newspaper account of the JFK assassination while halfway around the world on his VIP trip. And he's pausing to think, how is all of this information about the alleged assassin already in this paper? And of course, his real job, his day job, was organizing covert ops. He was the liaison between the intelligence services and the Joint Chiefs, the military. And that's all he did, was work in covert operations and black ops. And he's reading that newspaper account, and almost immediately it occurs to him that this looks like a cover story. how in the world, this is the day before, this is the days before the internet. How in the world are all these media, these newspapers, how do they have all of this information, this biographical information on Lee Harvey Oswald hours after he's been arrested? It, it's not possible unless it was prepared in advance and dumped on the media. So those two things, reading the biological information, the biographical information on Lee Harvey Oswald so soon after the assassination. I mean, they knew everything. And reading that provoked him into thinking this might be a cover story. And if that's the case, there will be other uh, pieces of evidence that support that. When he got home, found out that the 112th had been told to stand down, meaning the additional security was not there in Dallas. He realized this was something that came straight out of his office, and he was sent on vacation, just like Gerald Benn, the driver, or Gerald Benn and others from the Secret Service were sent on vacation. He was sent on vacation to get him out of the way so this could happen without his interference or without his suspicion when he, you know, somebody else was going to fill his shoes temporarily and do the opposite of what he normally would have done. So this is another guy who contributed a lot to this case. And of course, there's several books. You can find them on YouTube as well. But he wrote famously the book, The Secret Team, which is really, in essence, what I just described, how uh, the secret team that he was very familiar with, very aware of, it normally did covert ops overseas. In his view, it was the same secret team that assassinated JFK. He goes into great depth in that book. And he was very careful to make sure and explain that it doesn't require the contamination of all the Secret Service members. It just takes a rogue element within the Secret Service because everyone follows orders. It's very much like the military. And if the guys at the top, the deciders, the decision makers, are in on the plot, everyone else by default will be in on the plot unwittingly. They don't realize it, but by obeying orders, they are carrying out the plot of the deciders of the rogue element. And of course, this is where he begins. He begins the entire this secret team. He begins with the Secret Service because they're the ones who control the fate of the king. And in order to get close enough to the king, or in this case, the president, to assassinate him, you're going to have to compromise the elite guard. And so this is where he sort of begins his look at this secret team. Of course, at the head of the Secret Service in those days was James Rowley. We've already established the fact that James Rowley was very tight with LBJ, and of course, in his role as head of the Secret Service, he appoints as these motorcades are going out and these presidential trips are going out around the country, especially during campaign season. It's his job to appoint the various details, in this case, the Dallas detail. And we've gone through and established how carefully each person was chosen. And some people were eliminated. You know, in advance, we talked about Thomas Shipman. Evidently, it was determined early on he was going to be a problem. So in October of 63, he died very suspiciously. I won't go into that, but that enables or opens up an opportunity to replace Thomas Shipman with a driver of his choosing who might not respond the way that Thomas Shipman would have responded in a moment of crisis. And of course, we talked about William Greer and how he responded in that moment of crisis. After, and of course, he put other people in charge we're going to talk about that were equally involved in the plot as he was. The person that's going to be the cleanup man, he sends to Dallas. The person who's in charge of all of the Dallas goings on the ground, he sends him to Dallas. And he as far as personnel, it's he who is in charge of flipping basically the experienced personnel of the Secret Service and replacing it with the inexperienced personnel. We talk about all those different agents who were transferred off the White House detail in the months before the assassination and replaced by inexperienced members who will just do whatever they're ordered to do and won't ever question whatever order comes down. That's all the work of James Rowley. After the shooting, after 2 days later, when Oswald himself was shot, he acted on LBJ's orders and placed Secret Service agents by Oswald's bed. And when LBJ called, talked to the surgeon in the room, and told the secret, and then by extension, ordered the Secret Service agents to get that final deathbed confession. It was because James Rowley had placed those Secret Service agents in Oswald's room next to his bed. And so every step of the way, you see Rowley putting the people in place. That's his role. He doesn't fire a shot or anything of that nature. His role is to remove the people that won't go along or might be problems, replace them with people that will go along, won't be problems, and then have people strategically located so that if Oswald recovers or regains consciousness, they can get the confession that they need, knowing he's not ever going to survive ultimately. And all they really want is a confession. There's not going to be a trial, a confession that they can take to the American people. If you remember, the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General, and also J. Edgar Hoover have already produced memos saying the American people must be convinced that he would have been convicted if there had been a trial. And so that was the purpose of the confession, to give a deathbed confession, which Oswald never gave, by the way, to the American people to satisfy that need for closure. Then, during his testimony to the Warren Commission, he covered up for the Secret Service all the mistakes and and of course, we've gone through the whole litany of mistakes. I'm not going to relitigate that, but there were tons and tons of mistakes, security protocols that were not followed, and then improprieties like the night before at the cellar, losing the guns, losing their service weapons, losing their credentials. And I mean, it was just a clusterfuck from the beginning. Everything went wrong. And he sat there in front of the Warren Commission with a straight face and covered up all of that. And then, had the audacity years later in the House Select Committee to tell the members that none of those people were ever punished on his watch. In fact, they were all promoted. Subsequent, as LBJ became president and worked his way through 5-6 years of presidency, Rowley becomes his right-hand man, never leaves his side. And so, there was a payoff to Rowley, no question. He did his part. One of the persons that he placed strategically was Thomas Kelley, who was the cleanup man. He was the inspector that was sent to Dallas to clean up any loose ends. And of course, in the aftermath of anything, even if it's very carefully planned, as Dallas was, there's going to be loose ends. And so one of the first orders Kelley gives was to the enforcer, Elmer Moore, to confiscate film and photos at Dealey Plaza. And then he ordered Moore to speak with these Parkland doctors who were becoming a problem to the narrative, which was emerging that all the shooting was done by Oswald from behind in the Texas School Book Depository. You can't have doctors saying throat wound was a wound of entrance. You can't have doctors talking about the back of the president's head being blasted out and that the entry wound was here on the side. You can't have doctors saying these sorts of things. So Elmer Moore was dispatched to bully these doctors into changing their story, and some did, which then created a new problem because you still had the ones who didn't, and now you have another story. Nevertheless, that was Thomas Kelley's doing, and Elmer Moore just did what he was told. He was the enforcer, and he did what Thomas Kelley ordered him to do. Some other orders that Kelley was responsible for. He was the one who ordered JFK's body to be removed from Dallas and flown to DC for the autopsy. According to Dr. Wecht, this is the single greatest criminal act that happened in the direct aftermath of the JFK assassination. It should never have happened. They had a very competent medical examiner in Dallas who would have conducted an autopsy that was honest, but he had one thing going against him, and he wasn't military, he was civilian. In other words, he would have conducted an autopsy that was independent. And that's not what they wanted. They wanted an autopsy that was controlled by 36 to 40 people, it was estimated, were in that medical examination room, controlling Humes and Boswell and later Fink in their efforts to determine the cause of President Kennedy's death. It was completely controlled. It was a contrived autopsy. But that was the point of it. And it was Kelley who ordered that body removed under threat of, physical violence if necessary. If the Dallas authorities tried to stand in the way, he had orders to use Secret Service muscle to enforce his decision. He's the one that ordered the limo to be removed from Dallas. He's the one that ordered it cleaned, and then he ordered it removed, sent to Dearborn, Michigan to be rebuilt. He's the one who ordered JFK Connolly's clothing to be sent to cleaners and or destroyed, depending on whose it was and how badly it was damaged. And he later served as the Secret Service liaison to the Warren Commission, helping, he was the middle guy who, acting on instructions from his boss, James Rowley, made sure that the Warren Commission did not get information that would paint the Secret Service in a negative light. In other words, he, along with Rowley, covered up. Rowley did it in direct testimony. Just covered up and covered up and covered up. Kelley did it by withholding evidence. Remember, the Warren Commission tried to get threat sheets, tried to get documents about previous motorcades and stuff. It was Kelley who said those have been destroyed and they're not available. So, he was kind of like Allen Dulles protected the CIA, Thomas Kelley protected the Secret Service. So what you see retroactively as you look back after the fact, the Warren Commission and even the House Select Committee years later, is that all of these government agencies had someone protecting their interests, so that only, when you get to the House Select, the Warren Commission, the only person left to pin it on was Lee Harvey Oswald. Everybody else was protected. I mean, even the mafia was protected in a way, because J. Edgar Hoover didn't believe in organized crime even existed, didn't want any examination of the organized crime, and he was the one giving the evidence to the Warren Commission. So you have the FBI protected by Hoover, you have the mafia protected by Hoover, you have the CIA protected by Dulles, you have the Secret Service protected by Kelley. I mean, everywhere you look, these investigations are contaminated from the beginning, corrupted, because there's all these these agents representing all these different government agencies, protecting them, withholding evidence, destroying evidence. And the only entity left was dead in the grave, couldn't defend himself. Lee Harvey Oswald gets pinned on him. Then years later in the House Select Committee, when it appears Sprague's going to look into the CIA, I mean, that was his first order of business. They replaced him with Blakey, and because Blakey's a mob guy. And so by this time, they have agreed, well, if we're going to dribble out a limited hangout position, we're going to have to dribble out somebody. We're going to have to let somebody hang on this. So the conspiracy that the House Select Committee comes up with years later was the mob. They named Carlos Marcellus, Santos Trafficante, Jimmy Hoffa, Sam Giancana, and and they throw in Lee Harvey Oswald there. Somehow he was still involved in it. because all of these, every time we have one of these investigations, the government protects itself. You literally have the fox in charge of the hen house, guarding the hen house. It's just, it's unbelievable. The third guy that the Secret Service needed to make this, to corrupt all of the Secret Service and all the agents, was Emory Roberts. He's the guy on the ground in Dallas that day. I've got him circled here following JFK. And technically, the documents say Kellerman was in charge of the Dallas trip, but that wasn't the case. That was covered. Roberts was running things. Remember Gerald Ben, Ford Boeing, Boring on vacation. 11 other experienced Secret Service agents were gone. They were transferred out, replaced by inexperienced. So they're just sitting there like little birds looking up at Mama Bird with their mouth open, waiting to be fed. What do you want me to do next, boss? And Emry Roberts was able to pass along. You can just imagine, you can see the hierarchy. It starts at the top with Rowley, and he sends his instructions through Kelley, and Kelley gives his instructions to Roberts, and Roberts runs everything on the ground. And of course, guys like, what's his name? Just forgot his name. Elmer Moore. They just do what they're told. He's the enforcer. He does what he's told. So even though Kellerman was technically in charge of the trip, Emry Roberts was running it. And he's the guy. I mean, look at a series of decisions that Emry Roberts personally was responsible. And I got this information from Vince Palomera, and he's widely known as or accepted as the Secret Service expert when it comes to the research community. So he went through and determined by documents who made what decision. It's pretty clear Emry Roberts is in charge because Roy Kellerman didn't make any of these decisions. Emry Roberts did. So he's the guy that prevailed upon the Kennedy people to choose as the speaking location for the president's speech that day, the Trade Mart versus the Women's Museum. Of course, this was because the Trade Mart was the final place to get him. If they didn't get him at Love Field, which they didn't, and then they didn't take a shot at him in Dealey Plaza, which, by the way, wherever you take a shot at him becomes the location, because you're not going to get a second chance at this. So if they don't get him at either of the first two locations, the Trade Mart was going to be the final opportunity, and it had to be a place that was a security nightmare. So here is Emry Roberts, who represents the Secret Service, recommending a place that the Kennedy people don't want because it's not a secure environment. And here he is, number 3 in charge of the elite guard, recommending that they go to the place that's not safe versus the place that is safe. And of course, that's the building that both LBJ and John Connally wanted JFK to do his speech in for obvious reasons. He's the guy that waved the limo escorts, Ribka and Lawton, off the limo and out of the motorcade. Remember, right as they're beginning the motorcade in Dealey Plaza, actually in Love Field, they jumped up on the running boards, the limo, and it was Emry Roberts waved him off, and they're standing there like, oh, what do we do now? Your car's full. There's already somebody with LBJ. You're waving us off the limo. What do we do? Of course, they went, got themselves a cup of coffee waiting for their next assignment. But that stripped away some more of the security. And of course, as we did in an earlier episode, we went through and documented all of the different levels of security that were stripped away that day. Here, including Godfrey McHugh. He's the guy that removed Godfrey McHugh from his seat in the front middle of the limo, told him to go sit in the back. He removed the order of the motorcade. He put the media flatbed, instead of being out front like it usually was, he moved it to the back of the motorcade. He's the guy that ordered 8 of the motorcycles out of the motorcade, the 4 up front, the 4 to the side. In other words, and then he also, acting on Bill Moyer's request, which was an LBJ 8, he ordered Sam Kinney to remove the bubble top. So here's what Emry Roberts was necessary. He was a pivotal part of this is all of the instructions that the just lost my camera. Not sure why. All right, it's back on again. And let me make sure I got the right microphone here. Having all kinds of technical difficulties this morning. I apologize for that. Okay, so Emry Roberts' role in all this was to strip away the security and create open fields of fire, clear fields of fire. So now that all the people have been moved from the front, the middle, and the sides, you know, the front shot, which entered the president's neck, is now possible. The side shot, which hit and took his head off, basically is now possible. And of course, the bubble top being removed. Not that it was bulletproof, it wasn't. The way I've heard it explained is that it's bullet resistant, not bulletproof. If you've ever had a watch that is waterproof or water resistant, you understand the difference. It wouldn't have stopped a bullet if it hit it direct, but it might have caused it to glance off if it was rounded, if it had hit it at an angle. It was shattered, might only survived one shot, but it would certainly provide a warning. Anyway, Emry Roberts is responsible for all that being removed. So here's the famous picture of him waving off Lawton and Hank Ribka, which you can't see, he's out of the picture. He also worked with Dallas Mayor Cabell to change the motorcade route to last minute. So here you see it's Secret Service protocol not to have 90-degree turns in the motorcade. The original route didn't have any 90-degree turns. It was the number 3 in the Secret Service who worked with the Dallas mayor. You could almost understand a political figure like a mayor screwing up, putting in 2 90-degree turns. He doesn't know what he doesn't know as far as security protocols are concerned. But boy, Emory Roberts should know. But as we've learned, this was standard operating procedure as far as the plot was concerned. There was a 90-degree turn in Chicago. There was a 90-degree turn in Tampa. And there's 2 turns of 90 degrees or greater in Dallas. So this becomes like part of the plan. But they can't put it in the papers weeks before. People are going to notice that and say, hey, wait a second, why are we? So you wait till the last minute, then you put in the changes. And by then it's too late people don't have time to notice and too late to change it. He's the guy who ordered the 112th Military Intelligence Group to stand down, you know. So in absence of Fletcher Prouty, Emry Roberts took over and he just called him up, said, don't come, we don't need you. And then he's the guy who ordered the Secret Service agents the follow-up car, which he was riding in, you know, so he's sitting right there and he ordered them all to stand down. In fact, when one of them, Rady, tried to get off the follow-up car and run up, you can see Rady, he's standing right next to Roberts. Roberts is sitting up there in the middle. Rady's standing on a running board next to him. Rady got off that running board and appeared like he was preparing to run up to the president after the first shot. And Roberts yelled at him, said, get back, get back. And he told everybody else to stand down. So, and of course, these are all inexperienced agents, and so they're doing what they're told. So it continues. When we get to Parkland, Roberts took a quick look at JFK, ran up and looked at him. And now this is after he ordered Jackie, who is clinging to her husband. She didn't know what else to do. You and I would do the same thing. Clinging to her husband, and he yells at her, get off him. And takes one look and says, he's dead. I'm going with Lyndon. And from that moment on, he was with Lyndon Johnson. And boy, you know, that doesn't prove he's in on the plot. It just proves what a cold-hearted bastard he was. In testimony to the Warren Commission, he covered up the all-night partying by his men, and the booze, the women, the night before the assassination, losing the badges and the guns. In other words, he just lied straight to the Warren Commission members about, it took media members. It took the media to figure out, like guys like Drew Pearson, to figure out what really happened. And then years later in the House Select Committee, by that time, the evidence was such that everybody knew that it had happened. But in the immediate aftermath, the Warren Commission and Emry Roberts' testimony to the Warren Commission, he covered all that up, alibied for his men. And then after LBJ assumed office, Roberts became his personal secretary. Now, it's kind of interesting. LBJ did not leave him in the capacity of his personal protector because he didn't trust him. He had good reason not to trust him. He knew the part that Emory Roberts had played in compromising the security that killed JFK. He did not want someone who had already done it once to be in that same position to maybe do it again with him. So he made him his personal secretary, but he would not let him participate in his security detail after that. So kind of an interesting little twist on that. So what you have here is a compromised leadership of the Secret Service. You say, well, what are the motives? Well, the number one motive was they were loyal to LBJ. They weren't loyal to JFK. So whatever LBJ told them to do, and we've already gone through LBJ's motives. LBJ had very strong motive to participate in the assassination. And so what he said to James Rowley became what they did because their loyalty was to him. And of course, they also knew about JFK's reckless behavior. They knew about his drug use, his sexual escapades. They knew about how reckless he had been. And because they were always there. That's what the Secret Service is supposed to be discreet. They know about all these things. They're not supposed to tell anybody. But doesn't mean they're not human. And they don't form an opinion. They thought he was a moral degenerate. They were much like the Joint Chiefs in this respect. They also thought he was soft on communism. LBJ was going to be more of a cold warrior. So from a national security standpoint, Secret Service disagreed with the foreign policy decisions that JFK had been making and thought he was weak. They thought he was soft. But the primary motivator was they did not like the direction he was heading with respect to civil rights. He was a crusader. He didn't come into office as a crusader. He changed. It's kind of like, that's the thing about Kennedy. He changed in office. He came in as a cold warrior. He morphed into a peace candidate. He didn't come in as a civil rights crusader. He morphed into a civil rights crusader. And so, in some respects, you can kind of understand these agencies, these entities that supported JFK at the outset and then changed their mind as time went on because JFK changed. He changed as he grew into the office and he became a leader. And he was threatening, as we've discussed in previous episodes, he was threatening all of the entrenched interests of all these different conspirators. Well, that includes the Secret Service. And, we told the story yesterday of Abraham Bolden. He was the champion of Abraham Bolden. And he was a champion of civil rights. And going forward, he was going to be more of a champion of civil rights. And this Secret Service was a good old boy network. And all these Southern boys, they were Southern conservative Democrats. I'm not sure you could call them KKK members, but they were certainly, today we would call them segregationists for sure. They were not in support of the direction President Kennedy was going with respect to civil rights. So there's your motives. And then look at the payoffs the Secret Service got for participating in this conspiracy. First of all, the moral degenerate is no longer president. Their guy is president, the guy that they like. The communist sympathizer, and that's, of course, in their view, is no longer president. We have a cold warrior who's president and fixed to go to war in Vietnam. And LBJ, though he will pass the 64 civil rights law, basically to get himself elected, and to win the black vote for the next, he was quoted as saying, now that we pass this, we'll have the African-American vote for them. And he didn't say African-American, but he said, we'll have the African-American vote for the next 100 years, basically. He was a very cynical political ploy by LBJ. He was not a civil rights crusader by any stretch. He was one of them. And they understood the reasons he pushed the 64 civil rights law. But they also understood he was not going to make it a moral crusade like JFK was. So that was over. Rowley went on to be LBJ's personal protector, never left his side. Kelley went on to serve as Secret Service liaison to the Warren Commission, got a promotion within the Secret Service, and Roberts served as LBJ's personal secretary. They were all loyal to LBJ, and he took care of them afterwards. And so what you see is going back to where we started today, Fletcher Prouty said the elite guard will protect the life of the king, quote, as long as it agrees with the king. And after 3 years of JFK as president, the Secret Service no longer agreed with the king. And so decisions were made. And I don't think it started with them, honestly. I think at some point LBJ had a little talk with James Rowley, and that's when the Secret Service's role sort of took shape, when he informed them, hey, this is what's fixing to happen, and we need your help with this. And Rowley begins making personnel decisions at that point. And then on the day of, Kelley is sent to handle all the loose ends. And in the lead up and on the day of, Emry Roberts, who is in on the conspiracy, is making all of these decisions, stripping away all of the president's security. And they've already eliminated one of their own who might be a problem. Then on the day of, Chuck Robertson becomes a problem when he finds out what's going on. And so they disappear him. And then in the aftermath, when Abraham Bolden becomes a problem, we talked about what happened to him. By the way, I mentioned yesterday that a researcher, a JFK researcher, was interviewing. I still don't remember the name of the guy who was the JFK researcher, but he was interviewing. It was Emory Roberts, whom he was interviewing. I couldn't remember the name. I couldn't remember if it was Elmer Moore or Emory Roberts. It was Emry Roberts. And Emory Roberts, who had been in charge of all the decisions that were made on the ground that day, is the one who slammed his service revolver down on the table and basically threatened the researcher and tried to bully and intimidate him like he did, like he always did, and basically revealed through his response the vitriol and the hatred that the Secret Service as an agency, as a leadership group, had for Abraham Bolden because of his audacity to tell the truth about what had happened. And so my original question was, how does a conspiracy of the Secret Service take place? Same way a conspiracy of the CIA takes place, or the FBI. You don't have to control everybody. There are good members of the CIA. There are good members of the FBI. There are good members of the Secret Service in these days. They just weren't involved in us. Gerald Benn was back mowing his grass. Thomas Shipman was dead. Chuck Robertson was dead. These are Abraham Bolden was squirreled away in Chicago. These are good people that wouldn't have gone along with this. All you have to do is replace those good people with people that will take orders, and you got to have the people at the top who make all the decisions involved. They're going along with it, so that in the lead up to the planning, the preparation, they're making all these personnel decisions. They're making all these plans about motorcade routes. They're making all these decisions about security and leaving the motorcycles out and removing people here, removing media flatbed trucks there. And then in the aftermath, they control the testimony. They control what the Warren Commission, the investigative body, knows. They go and they either lie, they cover up, they withhold evidence, and there's your immunity. Going back to ultra vires, you've got to make sure that in the end you immunize yourself from any and all liability. And that's why the agents that screwed up every step of the way never got punished, because the bosses counted on them they did exactly what the bosses hoped they would do. And so instead of being punished, they were all promoted. That's your immunity. And so that's what Fletcher Prouty, that's sort of the thesis of his books, is that uh, it doesn't take all the entire agency, whichever agency you might be speaking of. Today, we're talking about the Secret Service, to be contaminated to kill the president. It just takes the leaders, the movers and shakers, the ones who make all the decisions. And then everybody follows along. And later they might wonder why the decisions were what they were, the orders were what they were, but it's too late. The president's dead. And they've all been rewarded, they've been promoted, and it's time to move on. And that's how it went. So that is the subject of today's episode. I wanted to make sure, and that I think this is a very important detail because it shows how these conspiracies take place. I think sometimes people think, oh, if it was this massive conspiracy, there were thousands of people, and no, there weren't. There was just a few sensitive points. Some of the points were intersecting points, which means they were the ones that controlled several of these conspirators, but it was a relatively few number, low number of people. It's few people, and they're the decision makers. And so that's how a conspiracy happens, and that's how it's covered up, because they give themselves immunity by covering up, withholding, lying about all the evidence. All right, that was episode 97. Tomorrow, hopefully, we'll be back inside my internet. I'll tell you, this has been a ordeal the last couple of weeks. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, tomorrow we're going to be looking at a topic, what is a limited hangout? Because this is a very important concept we need to understand as new information continues to get dribbled out. The government's running limited hangouts on us all the time, including one right now about the pandemic a few years ago. And it's just, it never ends. And so we want to talk about a limited hangout and how it applies to the JFK assassination, specifically the Secret Service. And it's something that's just happened within this last year by one of the Secret Service agents that was actually on the ground that day. So we'll be looking at that, and that will conclude our Secret Service series. And then we'll be plugging all these topics into a timeline, and starting on, I guess tomorrow's Wednesday, so that'll be starting on Thursday. So until tomorrow, I hope everybody has a good day. Check out my website, sphistory.com. Subscribe to my channel if you feel free to do that. Also, give me a thumbs up and hit the notification bell, and feel free to share this channel with anybody who you think might be interested. Or and those of you that are commenting, I appreciate all the comments. I read them all, and I try to get back to them as soon as I can throughout the day. Some have asked me about topics that we've already covered. Feel free to go back and look at, on this channel, this is our 97th episode, and they're all about relatively the same length. Some are a little over an hour, some are under an hour. They were shorter at the beginning. I kind of was trying to keep them to 20 to 30 minutes, and I violated that after about a week. But anyway, I've covered a lot of topics. So chances are some of these questions you might be able to answer yourself, because we've already covered in an earlier episode. If you just go back and look through them. But certainly don't feel free to ask me. If you can't find the episode, perhaps I can direct you to the right one to watch, so you have to look through all of them. So until tomorrow, I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.